Well, hey everybody, it's that time of year again. That's right, you guessed it, it's frickin' cold outside, which means it's probably in the neighborhood of February. I'm hoping. I don't really own a calendar. But for those of you who don't know what it is I do on this channel in the month of February, which I hope it is, I spend my time looking at games made by Rare, many of my old favorites and classics I may have missed out on over the years. And over the last 2 years of this tradition, I have had all kinds of fun revisiting my glory days in games. Last year we kicked off February 2015 with a look at Banjo Kazooie, a game which I overlooked in its currency and was a bumbling fool for having done so, but perhaps more so for skipping its sequel? That's right, the beloved Banjo Kazooie, originally released for the Nintendo 64, spawned a much-loved sequel that apparently the whole world is already all upon's over. Though I, somehow, know even less about the mythical Banjo Tooie than I knew about the legendary Banjo Kazooie a year ago. And this one came out after my much-beloved Donkey Kong 64, so now I can compare them. Ominous laugh. The game begins with no proper reference to the first game. 2 years have passed by now, and our heroes are maxing and relaxing over a game of poker on a dark and stormy night. Seems appropriate. Unbeknownst to them, however, are the doings a-transpiring in the out-of-doors. Gruntilda, who has been trapped under a boulder all this time, apparently just down the street from Banjo's house, is about to be set free by her two sisters who have just arrived at Spiral Mountain. It isn't long before Grunty is free again, and as an act of quick and dirty revenge, well, it's time to blow up Banjo's house, don't you know? The crew manages to make it out okay, but Bottles, having heard Wolf being cried one too many times, stays behind, and wow, really? They actually killed off Bottles. I was kind of shocked that they would actually kill a character in a game like this, plus he and Kazooie were like my favorite exchange to watch in the first game. Well, it's a good thing that revenge begets revenge, because off we go to make that witch pay for taking our friend from us so young. It's actually kind of remarkable how dark this opening really is when you think about it. They even have us go to Bottles' house to find out that he has a wife and young children. Like, they have us talk to his wife, and when she asks us when he's coming home, we get all comically evasive and such. Ho ho ho! Look at us so skillfully not breaking bad news to a friend. But at the same time, Bottles' ghost seems perfectly content to just hang out next to his corpse for the whole game. Like, you couldn't talk to your family instead of us? You seem totally cogent, and, like, seem to be only mildly put off by the experience. Whatever, that's beside the point because revenge! Oh, and there's some other thing about turning all the inhabitants of the land into zombies or whatever. So far, we're off to a pretty strong start. There's a lot going on in this intro, and even if it feels like a story that doesn't need to happen if it doesn't have to, the game is more than aware of this and doubles down on its status as a sequel to really make it feel like one. Short of sending you to a new area and calling it next door, Banjo Tooie is just fine with letting us wander around Spiral Mountain to our heart's desire, only now it's been decimated by Grunty's magical assault. Cracked earth and craters everywhere, all of the little tutorial areas from the first game ruined and useless now. You can even work your way up to Grunty's ruined lair if you want. All of this is essentially superfluous. The game could have just as easily dropped us right into the Isle o' Hags, which is where we go right after we've wandered Spiral Mountain to our heart's content, but the developers allowed this largely unused area of the game to exist here despite it taking up resources and development time. They didn't just show us a cutscene where everything gets ruined, they let us investigate and find all the gory details for ourselves. I love that. It allows for a real connection with the first game, something that we can get emotional over when we consider where this all came from. And what's more, you even start the game with all of the abilities that you ended the first game with. And in light of this, I would like to take a moment to say, thank you. Seriously, thank you. Nothing bothered me more as a kid than booting up a sequel only to find that we're back to square one. I mean, why the hell don't I have the powers from the last game, Capcom? And I do believe I had the Tanuki tail when I finished Mario 3. What gives, Shigeru? Yes, both joke examples, but my point still stands. I mean, I get why sequels start you off with a fresh plate to fill up with delicious abilities and items and such, but even now, when I realized that all of my old abilities were still intact, I instantly saw this game as more interested in expanding on what is here rather than rehashing the experience just with new levels. So needless to say, I was impressed and encouraged. Everybody assured me that Banjo Tooie was exactly the kind of sequel that everybody hopes for, expanding and elaborating on the things that the first game attempted or accomplished, and in one very big way I think this game pulls it off, and I'm not talking about the complete lack of Mr. Vile, although that was pretty awesome. The levels in Banjo Tooie are a big step up from Banjo Kazooie. They aren't quite at the level of Donkey Kong 64, but I am willing to chalk a lot of that up to my own nostalgia coating the experience and the lack of an expansion pack. Being upfront and honest, I don't really like how segmented the levels are. This is definitely something DK64 has over Banjo Tooie. This game has a lot of areas to explore in each of the levels, which in itself is great. Feels like Donkey Kong 64, but so many of them are behind loading instances. This is a small complaint to be sure, as the Nintendo 64 always had great load times, being a cartridge console and all. But as big as these levels actually are, the constant screen blackouts made them feel choppy and hard to commune with, if you want to get needlessly wordy. But I'm not going to take that away from what they did manage to pack into all of these levels. In that respect, I will say, even though the game didn't utilize the expansion pack like DK64 did, they certainly did their darndest to make sure we didn't notice. All of the levels do a fantastic job of feeling big and expansive. Through use of multiple layers and a central hub layout, even after completing a level, I still feel like I haven't seen it all, which actually often wound up being true. Sure enough, just when I started to think that the levels were too big or too convoluted for their own good and that I should just give up and move on, I was shocked to discover just how interconnected they all are. Many of the levels feature branching pathways that take you back into old levels and even forward into levels you haven't unlocked yet. These are rarely more than a quick visit and a trip back, but it's still neat to see the level designers thinking laterally in terms of when you get new abilities and where and how to use them. Yes, which isn't something they tried in Donkey Kong 64. You got me there. One thing, however, I don't really appreciate about this game's level design is the overworld. I know that sounds kind of pedantic, but it's kind of a big deal, or at least it is for me. In the first game, it worked because they made it clear that we were working our way through our enemy's castle. Castles have rooms and big antechambers, and thus a disjointed approach. You know, going through a door into a new area isn't that big of a deal. But in Tooie, it's essentially the same method, except this time we're in nondescript adventuring world, which in my mind demands a modicum of fluidity. One thing I loved about Donkey Kong 64 was how DK Isles conveyed so much majesty just in its huge open nature. You could see it all coming together as one huge vibrant painting that changed sceneries and themes with almost no effort at all as you walked, swam, or flew freely between them all. It was a weird island to be sure, but it felt like an island, for lack of a better word. The Isle of Hags in Banjo Tooie feels like teleport zones, taking our characters from grassy lowlands to misty cliff tops to weird mine things that are halfway up a mountain, back to grassy lowlands again. This is just... it's fine, I just wish it were smoother, both mechanically and thematically. Despite the disconnected nature of the overworld, the levels and environment design in this game seem to carry themselves with a bit more personality than the first game. I mean, Kazooie had very standard adventure game locales for levels. Ice level, starting grassy place, haunted place, temple of one nationality or another, all the classics. But in Tooie, I could feel the empty, creepy atmosphere of the abandoned theme park that is Witchy World. Wandering around Mayhem Temple, I could just sense all of the secrets that place held, screaming out at me. And yeah, Kazooie had Gobi's Desert, which I guess is kind of the same effect as Mayhem Temple, but I think what helped my experience with the levels in Tooie was how the gameplay was designed, which, if you'll recall a year ago, I took issue with in the first game. Thankfully, Banjo Tooie does away with a lot of the things like extra lives and the resetting note scores, and even makes sure that there's plenty of opportunities and ways to regain your health, which I know doesn't sound like much, but when I'm able to wander a level free from having to worry about how many lives I have or where I'm going to get my next health pickup, it makes it so much easier to engage with the level that I am playing. It makes the levels more of an experience with challenges within them, rather than just being a challenge overall, something that I think is important to the 3D platformer experience. Now, while I do love the levels in this game, I cannot say I'm a huge fan of how they populated them. The NPC characters are fine, I'm not going to rag on them, but the enemy designs leave a lot to be desired. I mean, I never really found the enemy designs in Banjo Kazooie to be all that inspiring either, and I guess I can equate the two sets here. They have no real presence in the game other than being mobile obstacles. There's no overarching theme, except that they attack you on sight for some reason. And not only that, they're often annoying. If they're not draining any and all meaning from the term, then they're infiltrating my nightmares with what I can only assume are sound clips of actual animal vivisections. And even the monster designs that I like, I'm not enjoying. Here I am enjoying my time in Jolly Roger Lagoon, thus far my favorite level in the game, until I am reminded why I never get my hopes up about water levels. What is that thing, and why is it trying to steal my soul through its eye? And, what is, I can't even run away, they're everywhere! So even if the enemies in this game are either subpar or pure and uncut nightmare fuel, there are plenty of NPCs to talk to and interact with spread across this game. They come in all different forms and serve all kinds of purposes. All of them felt like they belonged, except for the Canary and Glitter Gulch Mines, who I'm pretty sure is actually just a really methed out banana fairy from Donkey Kong 64. All she did was introduce a minigame that made Mario Party feel like a JRPG. I'm winning, but I have tendinitis! The abundance of characters is a good thing here, because the writing and dialogue were obviously made a priority in this game's development. For the most part, the first game's writing was just fine. It was like they tried and maybe didn't stick the landing, but they certainly didn't flunk it either. This game has a great self-aware, sarcastic style to its humor that I think gives it just a little bit of something special. It was almost enough to distract me from the still infuriatingly pointless voice acting. Yeah, still not gonna let that go. It seems like everybody was right. Banjo Tooie is a pretty awesome game, even just from a front-end perspective. The level design is expansive and clever, the controls have been given a major refining, and even the dialogue is so much stronger than the first game. I'm pretty sure this game is a win. But I can only be pretty sure for a few reasons. I just want to point out how interconnected these levels get, and how far this game is willing to send you for a single Jiggy. Here I'm going to read you what is necessary for one particular Jiggy in Pterodactyl Land. Become Mumbo, visit the Styracosaurus family, enlarge the little blue guy, then become the Baron Bird and use the Taxi Pack ability to take the sick one to the train station. Take the train to the Isle of Hags, where you become Mumbo again and use the heal ability. I mean, I had Mumbo standing right next to him back home. I'm not sure why I had to bring it all the way out here, or how I was supposed to figure that out, by the way. Then take the train to Witchy World, blow up the cage holding the Styracosaurus daughter so she can join you on the train, then take them both back to Pterodactyl Land. That's for a single Jiggy. I got 2 different Jiggies while trying to get that one, which I know is net profit Jiggies, but still! See, even Kazooie knows what I'm talking about! This was kind of the first sign that I probably wasn't going to finish this game in time for the video. I mean, I plugged away at it for about a month and a half, and I'm still working at it, but it slowly revealed itself to be my complete undoing. This game is not content with being a thread of actions or events, but a miasma of threads, all interconnecting, crossing over, weaving in and out of each other. Here's another fun one. You can use Globos anywhere. Like, one from one level is just as good as one from another level, which led me into accidentally using one from Pterodactyl Land in the Isle of Hags, which means that when I got back to Pterodactyl Land, they were like, oh, you don't have one anymore because you used it somewhere else. And I was like, oh, good, so I get to wander around the Isle looking for the replacement one to take back to... You get the picture. This game reeks of genius. But we would do well to remember that genius is only so far from madness. There's a lot in this game I didn't see coming. So yeah, as of this recording, I haven't finished the game yet, but I am happy to say that I'm adding it to my list of games I would take to a desert island with me, because apparently I need that kind of time. As the game goes on, there is so much running around, which in turn is tied to a lot of trial and error, which results in the flow of the game being sacrificed on the altar of scope. This game's transformation mechanic, for instance, does a lot to expand this game's progression and what the player can do with it. It's a great idea, but it's always for a very specific directed purpose, and all that time spent getting to and from those objectives is time spent running around with what amounts to a downgraded version of our player characters. And I had better not hear anybody who complains about the Kong switching in Donkey Kong 64 propping up the different forms in Banjo Tooie. This is like a more boring Kong switching, with only 2 tag barrels, and each form has its own barrel. It adds so much extra idle playtime, running from location to location, and yeah, I know there are teleport pads, but there are like 4 per level. At least in Donkey Kong 64, there were tag barrels everywhere, and like 10 teleport pads that all interconnected with each other, whatever. This game is hampered by its own ambition at times, but given the right set of circumstances, I'm sure I would be all about this business. But aside from these things, I think my final call on Banjo Tooie is that I love it. I might even be able to base that simply on its philosophy. Last year, while playing the first game, all I could think about was how Donkey Kong 64 was everything Banjo Kazooie should have been. A contentious opinion to be sure, as they are different games, even down to their methods and goals, but what I see happening between these 2 games is solidified in Banjo Tooie. It's not just about fixing so-called mistakes, it's about progressing and refining a genre of gameplay, creating a rich tapestry for the player to dive into and discover, emphasizing the adventure and enabling wonder. Banjo Tooie is another chapter in Rare's story, so to speak, and honestly it makes me excited to continue exploring their catalog. To me, it says that there was a philosophy behind what they did, and it just makes me sad that we never got to see a proper Banjo 3E or Donkey Kong 64 2 of some kind. But of course, there were other experiments in their history, other genres that they attempted, and we will have to begin exploring those when FebuRAREy continues. Sometime this February. I don't know. I'm not really good at deadlines anymore. So, we'll see.